Now that we've seen how to set everything up for SharePoint Search, it's time to get in and start configuring how search is going to work for our end users. Now, what we're going to see is properties and manage properties and how we can breathe additional life and additional power into all the pieces of metadata that our search service has gone off and crawled. We're also going to take a look at the capability to add in rules, which will allow us to redefine user queries and help improve the result set that a user is going to get when they go off and execute a query. Let's start off by taking a look at properties and our search schema. Properties are, of course, all those little bits of metadata. And whenever SharePoint sees a property, be it on a file or be it inside of a SharePoint list, it's automatically going to crawl that property and make it available for search. So then that way when I go off and I do a search for, say, a last name, and that happens to appear inside of some property, maybe like reports to or edited by, it's automatically going to show up inside of my results. Now, the big thing about crawled properties is the fact that they can be mapped to managed properties. Now, if you're curious about some examples of properties, these are all the bits of metadata. So this is going to be things like, title, author, company, etc. Now, why might I decide to set up managed properties? Well, out of the box, our crawled properties are only going to simply take the values and throw it into the index file. The index file isn't going to store the property that that value is associated with. And so as a result, if I go in and I do a search for, say, author : Christopher Harrison, if author isn't a managed property, if SharePoint isn't storing, that query isn't going to work. And that's one of the big things that managed properties are going to bring to the table, is that it's going to allow me to do a search where the value that I'm looking for must be assigned to a specific property. In addition, our managed properties can also be used as refiners. What refiners allow us to do is inline subqueries. So let's say that I go off and I do a search for a widget, and I get back 100 items. Now, what I want to be able to do is kind of refine that search and dig in a little bit further and find the specific item about widgets that I'm looking for. And this is where my refiners come into play. And my refiners can allow me to look for specific date ranges. They can allow me to look for specific item types, and they can allow me to look for items that were maybe created for a particular company, from a particular location, or maybe by a particular author. So if it was author, and I go off and I look on the left-hand side, what I might see is authors like Bob Johnson, Christopher Harrison, Ed Lieberman, and then I could go ahead and click on one of them, and then my search results would automatically be filtered to show me all the items about widgets that were created by the person who I clicked on. Now, when you go in to set up a managed property, and our managed properties are going to link back to our crawled properties, there's a handful of different settings that are available to me. The first big setting is searchable. Now, what this really allows me to do is it allows me to change the default behavior of a crawled property. Whenever a property is crawled, what SharePoint's going to do is it's going to take that value and throw that into the index file. That's almost always what I want. But there may be times when we have a property that has very common values and it's just simply glomming up every search that we wind up doing. So we might decide, you know what, let's just not grab that property. Let's just not make it searchable. Let's just go ahead and hide it. And that's exactly what we can do by first converting that into a managed property and then just simply taking that check away. Typically, however, what you're going to do is make a property queryable. Now, I want to highlight the difference here between searchable and queryable. That searchable just simply means that if I go off and I do a search for, say, Harrison, the item's going to get returned. Queryable means that I'm going to specifically say, and it will only return items where that value appears inside of that property. So for example, Harrison : author, it would only return items where Harrison was inside the author property and nowhere else inside that document would it look, or inside those items would it look. We also have the ability to determine whether or not we want a property to be refinable, meaning that we could use this as a refiner on a search page. And then finally, last but not least, of whether or not we wanted to use this to be able to sort search results. Now, before you go off and start creating a whole bunch of managed properties, there's a couple of very big things that we want to keep in mind. Number one is that anytime that you add on a managed property, while SharePoint did in fact see this value earlier, it didn't put it with the property. So we need to do a full crawl so that way it will basically start all over again, and now when it stores the value, it will store the property that that's going to be associated with. It's going to cause a performance hit, because it's just simply now more work that my content processor and my index servers are now going to have to do. So I want to limit not only creating my managed properties, but I want to limit their functionality. So if I don't need it to be available as a refiner, if I don't need it to be available for sorting, then I'm not going to enable those options. Now, all of your properties collectively make up what's known as your search schema. Now, one of the big things that you have the ability to do when you're setting up your search schema is determine weights. So that if a search is executed and it happens to match a value inside of a particular managed property, then I can make sure that that item is moved up or maybe move down inside of the search results. So for example, if somebody goes off and they do a search and that happens to be inside the title or that happens to be the name of the author, chances are I'm going to want that moved up a little bit higher. And so I can do that by going in and managing the weight of my managed properties. SharePoint 2013 gives us the ability to set up a hierarchical search schema, so that we can actually set this up at the search service application, at the site collection level, so that way we have the ability to go in and set up different managed properties based on where the user query is coming from. Let's go in and take a look at how to set up a managed property and the results of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up my browser here. And you're going to notice that behind the scenes, I've gone in and I've set up a very basic little SharePoint list here called employees. Now, all that this is it's just simply an import from the AdventureWorks database. Now, if you take a look, if I just go in and I hit View Item here, you're going to notice my basic metadata. Give it a second. And so there is my metadata. And so you'll notice down below that we've got state province name. Let's say that what we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to execute a query where we said state province name : and then looked for a specific value. Well, if I try that right now, you're going to notice that this is going to fail. So if I fire up a brand new tab here and I head on over to the little search center that I created, and while this is coming up, I just want to mention that all that this is it's just a site collection with the top site set to be the Enterprise Search Center template. So that's really all that there is to it, nothing at all that's fancy here. So now, if I go in and I say Washington, let's start there, and I hit enter, you're going to notice that I'm going to get those items back. Now, I'm not going to get back Guy 1 at the very top, just happens to be Eric 1 that I get. But if I go in and I open up Eric here, you're going to notice, sure enough, the state province name is in fact Washington. So we know that the values exist inside the index. But if I go back to my search page here and I type in state province name : Washington, and I click search, you're going to notice that I don't get any results back. The reason for this is because while it crawled the property, it did not set this up as a managed property. We have to do that on our own. How do we do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's go in and set up our mapped property. I'm going to go into Central Administration. And I'm going to navigate to Service Applications, SharePoint Search, and to our search schema. Now, inside of our search schema, you're going to notice that we've got our two little tabs, our Managed Properties and our Crawled Properties. So if I go to our Crawled Properties and I do a search for state, province, name, you're going to notice that sure enough, it's listed as a crawled property. But it is not a managed property. If we want to set this up to be pointing to a managed property, we need to go into Managed Properties, click New Managed Property, and let's give this a name of State, Province, Name. Now, our data type is going to be text, and the two options that I want here are searchable and queryable. That basically all that I'm looking for here is just the ability to say state, province, name, colon, and then the state that I'm looking for. I'm going to go ahead and scroll the rest of the way down here. And then we've got our crawled properties. This is where we're going to map it up. So I'm going to say add a mapping. I'm going to say state, province, name. And click find. There it is. We'll choose it. We'll hit OK. Sure enough, it's listed. And now we'll scroll on down and hit OK. Now, once we've created the managed property, we need to go in and do a full crawl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick on over to my content sources here. And I've turned off the continuous crawl just so that way I could come into here and force a full crawl. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off now. Now, of course, in my environment, that'll take about 5 minutes. For you guys, it's done, well, now. So now, let me head on over to my search window again. Let me hit search. And now what you're going to notice is that now I'm getting results. I'm getting results because of the fact that state province name is now a managed property. Let's talk a little bit about transforming queries and results. Most SharePoint search corpuses, your indexes, are going to have millions of items. And while SharePoint search is going to, right out of the box, fit many scenarios, it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all product. That we're going to need to go in and customize not only the back end, not only how we're going to go off and crawl our data, but also how the results are going to be displayed out to the user. Then we want to be able to highlight different items. We want to be able to take queries and transform them into other things, limit where it is that our users are going to search through, allow them to do searches for particular types of items, etc. And fortunately, SharePoint 2013 gives us some very powerful tools to do exactly that. Now, before we get in and start taking a look at all the different rules and so forth that we can create, I want to highlight the way that all this is going to break down is based on variables. Our variables give us the ability to transform our queries. So if we want to take a query and convert that to something else, maybe automatically add on a property query. If we want to set up some additional keywords, if we want to limit items and only look for items inside of a particular location, then we have that capability. Now, the way that this is going to be broken down is by utilizing different variables. You'll notice I've highlighted a few here, where site is going to be the current URL, today is going to be today's date, user is going to be the display name of the current user, user email is going to be the email address of the current user, Our search box query is going to be the text that the user actually typed in, while the search terms are going to be the transformed query as it currently sits. If you want to see the rest of the variables, you'll notice that we've provided the link right there. Now, in order to set up our transformations, what we're going to do is we're going to set up our result sources, and then in turn, our rules. So the first thing is our result source. And this is going to give us the ability to determine the name, the protocol, the type of search that we're talking about, be it SharePoint search or people search, and then also utilize a query transform to determine which items are going to fall into that source. So if I only want to search for PDF documents, then I could go in and set up a query transformation to only look for PDFs. Now, our result sources are going to be containers for rules. And our rules are going to control the result set that the user actually sees. Inside of a rule, we're going to have the name, the conditions that need to be met to kick off that rule, and then the actions. And our actions are going to give us the ability to either promote results, usually in the past known as best bets, gives us the ability to put an item up at the very top, set up result blocks, which allow us to, inside of the current result set, move items up. And then finally, last but not least, we can also go in and change the ranked results by changing the query itself. Now, one of the other very cool things about rules is the fact that we can set up a publishing date. So if I only need to highlight items during a certain date range, then I can do that by setting up a publishing date range. Let's go in and take a look at how to set up a query rule. Here's what I want to do. One of the things that my users have been complaining about is they go in and they do a search for WA, for Washington, employees. And we want to make sure that whenever somebody does a search for WA employees, that we send them back the top 5 employees located inside of Washington. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by setting up our result source and a query rule. So let me fire up Central Administration. And I'm going to head on over to Manage Service Applications and a SharePoint search. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a result source here. And let me give this a name. And I'm just going to call this, in my case, Geek Trainer. Now, you're also going to notice here that on the protocol, we can choose where it is that we want to search, where it is that we want to send this search to. You'll notice the type of search that we have, be it SharePoint search or people search. And then you're also going to notice that we have the ability right from here to go in and transform our query. Now, for right now, I'm just going to hit save. And now I'm going to add some rules into this. And I'm going to do this by hitting my query rules and then by clicking new query rule. Whoops. Let's make sure that we choose our little content source. And now let's go ahead and say new query rule. And this is going to be return WA employees. Now, down below, you're going to notice, first of all, our query condition. And so we could go in and look for specific words. We could look for words from a dictionary, which, by the way, could be imported in from a term store, so we could actually use manage metadata for that. Or we could also go in and do an advanced query text match as well, which would give us the ability to do a regular expression. Now I'm just going to go ahead and go with this of my matches keyword exactly, and I'm just going to say WA employees. Now if you want to add on additional conditions, you can of course do that by hitting add alternate condition. And then you're going to notice that I've got 3 possible actions here. The first action that I have is to add in a promoted result. Now I'm just going to open this up. We're not going to use it, but I'm just going to open this up here real quick. And what I want to highlight is that this used to be our best bets. This is basically like, well, Google AdWords. that this will be up at the top. It'll actually be inside of a separate web part on the search page and give us the ability to make sure that certain items are always highlighted. The problem, however, with using a promoted result is that it does require a separate web part. This is one of the great advantages to using the result block. The result block doesn't need a separate web part. It's just going to appear inside the normal results. The catch, however, is the fact that it's just going to appear inside the normal results, and so it's not necessarily always going to catch the user. So you really have to decide which it is that you're looking for. So if somebody was doing a search for vacation, let's say, and I wanted to highlight the vacation request form, chances are that's going to be best inside of a promoted result. But if what I want to do is I want to maybe link to a handful of different departments' calendars, their time off calendars, that's going to be best inside the results because there's going to be multiple there, and my user isn't going to be necessarily looking for a specific ranking or otherwise inside of there. So we can just go ahead and throw that inside the normal results. And that's exactly what I'm going to use right here. Now, I'm just going to give this a very basic little title, results for, and then the term that they look for. And then on the query, I'm actually going to completely rewrite this. That I'm just going to take this out, and I'm going to say state province name, colon, Washington, and on the number of items, I'm going to choose 5. So here's what's going to happen. This is going to execute the query that I've typed in instead and just return back the top 5 Washington employees. Now, I'm going to hit OK. And there is my little result block. And if you wanted to add in multiple, you have that capability. Just keep hitting add result block. And then finally, you're going to notice down towards the bottom there that we've got the ability to change the ranked results. So if you want to change the sorting, then you can do that just by hitting the changed ranked results. Now I'm just going to expand out the little publishing here. And so you'll notice that we've got the ability to set up a publishing date range. The great advantage to this is, let's say that it's getting towards the end of the year, and we're now getting to that benefit re-enrollment period, that people need to re-enroll for their health insurance, for their 401k, etc. And so people are going to be going off and doing searches. So what I could do is I could go in, set up my promoted results, and then make sure that I set up a date range so that it will start working on, say, December 1st, and then stop working on January 31st or whatever your cutoff date happens to be. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. And so now we've set that up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a real quick little test here. So I'm just going to say WA employees. And if I click filter, what you're going to notice is that over there on the right-hand side, or towards the bottom, it's going to show off the fact that that will have tripped that rule. Let's get into our search app and configure the search app to use this new result source. So open up a brand new tab, https:// intranet geektrainer.com, search, hit enter. And now I'm just going to go into my site settings, and then under my result sources, I'm going to hit my little drop down, and I'm going to say set as default. We'll make that the default result source. I'm going to go back to search. And now let's go ahead and type in WA employees. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight here is the fact that this might not work right away. It does take a couple of minutes for this to propagate out. So if you go in, you set it up, you test it, and it's showing off, pause for a few minutes, give SharePoint time to do its thing behind the scenes, and then come in and officially test it. So now let's go ahead and hit search. And now what you're going to notice is that we're getting those 5 results for WA employees. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight about the UI here is you're going to notice that little container bar on the left-hand side. That's sort of the indication to the user that something special has happened with the result set, that we've injected in a brand new item into the result set, and the title would also appear inside of there as well. There is how we can customize the user search experience, I'm going to see you in the next lesson.